Long ago, before Japan was called Japan, its lands were covered in forests and morning mist, and the first people lived in quiet harmony with nature, gathering nuts, hunting, and shaping simple pottery, which would one day be known as the oldest in the world. This was the Jomon period, and life moved slowly like water through mountain streams. People built round huts, decorated clay jars with swirling patterns, and believed that spirits lived in stones, trees, and the wind. Later came the Yayoi period, when rice arrived from the continent, and bronze mirrors polished to a shine reflected drifting clouds and gentle faces. Villages began to form, rulers appeared, and history left its first traces. It is said that during this time, perhaps around the 3rd century A.D., the legend of the sun goddess Amaterasu was born, the divine ancestor of the Japanese emperors whose warmth still lives in tradition. These stories were whispered from elders to children, from priests to farmers. Then came the Kofun period, when great burial mounds rose from the earth, shaped like keyholes, covered in moss, still and green. On top, perhaps, sparrows perched, or wind rustled gently through grass, while below, the early rulers of Japan rested, their names long forgotten. Japan was not yet a nation, but it was already a land where people listened to the breath of the mountains and the hush of the forest. And so, slowly, without haste, the country that would one day be called Japan began to awaken to the world and to itself. As centuries passed, Japan began to take shape, not only in land and power, but in spirit. In the 8th century, during the Nara period, the country built its first permanent capital, modeled after the great cities of China, with wide streets and tiled roofs, quiet courtyards, and grand wooden temples that rose from the earth like calm thoughts. It was a time when Buddhism gently entered Japanese life, bringing with it golden statues, silent halls, and the soft turning of prayer wheels. Monks in robes the color of warm earth copied sacred texts by candlelight, and emperors planted gardens that reflected not ambition, but harmony. Soon came the Heian period, when the capital moved to Heian-kyo, today's Kyoto, and Japan turned inward, like a poet closing their eyes to find beauty within. Court life became a world of whispers, of flowing silk, of seasonal change measured in the blooming of cherry blossoms and the scent of incense burning slowly at dusk. Noble women wrote diaries in elegant Japanese script, capturing moments like dew on morning grass, the flutter of a sleeve, the sound of distant bells, the loneliness of autumn. Nothing rushed. Even sorrow was savored gently, like bitter tea in a lacquered cup. Outside the palaces, farmers tilled the land, fishermen cast nets into misty waters, and mountains stood unchanged, watching. The world of Heian Japan was soft and refined, like falling petals, a place where time itself seemed to pause and listen. As the courtly whispers of Heian slowly faded into the wind, Japan entered a new rhythm, one marked not by poetry alone, but by quiet discipline and watchfulness. In the late 12th century, power shifted from the imperial court to the emerging warrior class, and with it came the rise of the samurai, not as loud conquerors, but as men of calm faces and steady hands. The Kamakura period began like a slow tide pulling back the silk curtain of aristocratic life, revealing pine forests, mountain passes, and wooden dojos filled with the rustle of straw sandals and the breath of focus. These warriors followed a code not of ambition but of balance, bushido, where honor was a soft but unbreakable thread, binding action to silence. While emperors remained symbols, real power lived in the shogun's quiet chambers, where decisions were made not with shouts but with glances, and authority passed like smoke between clans. Temples rose along the sea, where monks practiced Zen. When the swords were finally sheathed and the land grew still, Japan entered the Edo period, a time not of war, but of waiting, like the silence after snowfall. From the early 1600s, under the Tokugawa shogunate, the country closed itself to the world, not in fear, but in deep intention, as if drawing a circle in the sand and stepping gently inside. For over 2 centuries, Japan became an island not just of geography, but of time, where daily life was measured by bells, footsteps, the folding of fabric, and the aroma of cooking rice. Edo, the city that would become Tokyo, grew into a quiet giant, its streets filled with merchants arranging silk, craftsmen hammering slowly in wooden stalls, and children flying kites against wide skies. Peace reigned, not loudly, but patiently, like the slow unfolding of a scroll. In the countryside, farmers planted by the rhythm of rain and moon, while in towns, people gathered in bathhouses, tea houses, and theaters, lit by paper lanterns. The samurai still walk the streets, but more often with books in hand than swords at their sides, studying poetry, painting, philosophy, and the fleeting nature of things. The aesthetic of wabi-sabi, beauty in imperfection, in the weathered and worn, touched every object, every gesture, every quiet sigh of a winter morning. Ukiyo-e artists carved worlds onto wooden blocks, bridges in the mist, waves that curled like thoughts, courtesans adjusting pins in silence. The outside world waited. But Japan, like a sleeping garden behind a closed gate, turned inward with grace, allowing centuries to pass like clouds, soft, slow, and full of presence. Though the Edo period was shaped by stillness, it was not without movement. Only the movement was inward, thoughtful, unfolding like the steam from a teacup, rising into morning light. Inside the walled compounds of samurai residences, quiet rituals shaped each day. The cleaning of swords that would never be drawn, the copying of Confucian texts in quiet rooms, the tending of small gardens arranged not for show, but for balance. In merchant quarters, ledgers were inked with precision, but above the numbers there was always time to pause, to drink tea, to admire the grain of the wood in a shop's doorway. The kabuki theaters brought flashes of emotion, masks, colors, music, but even this drama was stylized, framed within layers of control and beauty, a mirror of feeling rather than its explosion. And then, after more than 200 years of inward gaze and measured breath, the tide of the world reached Japan's quiet shores. In the middle of the 19th century, black ships appeared on the horizon, not monsters but messengers, bringing steam, steel, and the sound of distant nations. It was not an invasion but an invitation that could not be ignored, and Japan, with its temples and scrolls, its floating worlds and still gardens, blinked gently and began to open its eyes. The Tokugawa shogunate gave way, slowly, like frost melting from the roof, and in its place rose the Meiji era, a time of change, yes, but still filled with the same care, the same attention to form. Trains began to appear, cutting through rice fields like dark brushstrokes across parchment. Telegraph wires stretched from city to city, silent lines buzzing with new kinds of thought. Young men in stiff uniforms studied Western science, Western law, Western languages, but carried in their pockets small folded charms from home, from shrines nestled still in the forests. The emperor, long a symbol in shadow, now stood in the light, a gentle figure for a country finding its voice in a new century. Cities grew taller, faster, louder, but even in their rise, Japan moved with its own rhythm, blending the old with the new like ink in water. In Tokyo, electric lights shimmered on canals once lit by fireflies, and in quiet villages, people still tied ropes of straw at the new year, praying not for power, but for peace. The world had arrived, and Japan had stepped forward, not running, not shouting, but walking carefully, mindfully, carrying centuries of silence into the noise of modern time. When Japan formally entered the Meiji era in 1868, it did not abandon its past. It simply began rearranging the stones in the garden. The emperor, now restored as the official figurehead, was not a new leader, but an ancient presence stepping forward again, quietly, like a lantern brought from the back of the room. Western clothes appeared in government halls, railroads stretched across once remote provinces, and school children began to learn both kanji and foreign alphabets in bright classrooms where windows let in the morning light. There was movement, yes, locomotives, factories, shipyards, uniforms, but much of it happened with the same inward attention as a monk arranging calligraphy brushes. Villagers still gathered for seasonal festivals, carrying lanterns through rice fields now bordered by telegraph poles. In cities, clocks chimed the new hour, but tea was still poured slowly, carefully, on tatami mats. When Japan formally entered the Meiji era in 1868, it did not abandon its past. It simply began rearranging the stones in the garden. The emperor, now restored as the official figurehead, was not a new leader, but an ancient presence stepping forward again, quietly, like a lantern brought from the back of the room. Western clothes appeared in government halls, railroads stretched across once remote provinces, and school children began to learn both kanji and foreign alphabets in bright classrooms where windows let in the morning light. There was movement, yes, locomotives, factories, shipyards, uniforms, but much of it happened with the same inward attention as a monk arranging calligraphy brushes. Villagers still gathered for seasonal festivals, carrying lanterns through rice fields now bordered by telegraph poles. In cities, clocks chimed the new hour, but tea was still poured slowly, carefully, on tatami mats. Change did not come as a storm, but as a long rain, gentle at first, then steady, soaking into the roots. Japan sent students abroad and welcomed foreign advisors, not to imitate, but to absorb, to listen, to adapt. Brick buildings rose beside shrines, oil lamps flickered next to stone lanterns, and silk kimonos were worn under bowler hats. The Meiji era was not a leap from old to new, but a careful stitching together of both, like a scroll with gold leaf pressed beside charcoal ink, or a garden that adds new trees without removing the moss. The past was not erased, it was woven into the future, one quiet thread at a time. After the long reign of Meiji, the Taisho era arrived like a clearing sky, brief, calm, almost translucent in memory, lasting from 1912 to 1926. It was a time when Japan stood at the threshold between old confidence and new uncertainty, and for a moment, the world seemed wide with possibility. The emperor, delicate in health and gentle in presence, reigned quietly, while voices in the parliament grew louder, hopeful, more democratic. In Tokyo cafes, poets and thinkers gathered to read newspapers and dream of new ideas beneath hanging lanterns, their words mixing with the clink of teacups and the smell of roasted chestnuts from the street. Trains now crossed the country, carrying not only goods and soldiers, but laughter, letters, and theater troupes, whose traveling stages brought kabuki and modern plays to small towns under paper banners. Fashion shifted again. Women wore hakama skirts to universities, while men carried pocket watches beside family charms. The West was no longer distant. It sat side by side with the East. When the Showa era began in 1926, it carried with it both the weight of a rising modern state and the quiet ache of a country unsure of its reflection. In the early years, the hum of factories grew louder, and the rhythm of city life became quicker, more urgent. Bicycles rattled over stone streets, radios crackled with distant speeches, and smokestacks drew gray lines across the morning sky. There was a sense of strength, of motion, of direction, but beneath it all, there was also a silence, the kind that gathers in the corners of a house before a storm. The global world was changing, and Japan felt pulled between two currents, the inner traditions that still whispered through shrines and schoolyards, and the outward push for recognition, expansion, and control. Students still memorized haiku, women still arranged chrysanthemums in quiet alcoves, and fishermen still offered silent prayers before setting out to sea. Yet, above these daily rituals, something heavier moved. The government tightened, newspapers grew careful, and the maps in classrooms began to change shape, with borders redrawn in pencil and pride. And yet, even as politics grew sharp and decisions were made in polished rooms under ticking clocks, the land itself remained as it always had. Mountains unmoved, rivers flowing gently past tea farms and stone bridges. It was a time when Japan looked outward with ambition, but inward the soft echoes of the old ways still lingered in the smell of tatami, the sound of temple bells at dawn, and the deep, unspoken hope that whatever came next, the core, that quiet, enduring center, might remain untouched. As the 1930s deepened, Japan moved further into the shadow of its own rising ambition, stepping into a world no longer lit by reflection, but by urgency. The drums of empire beat softly at first, then louder, echoing through classrooms, parades, and factory floors. Military uniforms became more common than school robes, and maps were no longer just tools of geography, but of desire. The country moved with precision, with purpose, railroads expanding beyond its islands, flags planted in distant soils, but beneath all this outward force, something quieter held on. In villages where old people tended gardens behind wooden gates, the world still turned by the seasons, not by speeches. Morning rice steamed in iron pots, and cicadas still hummed in the pines. When the war finally ended in 1945, it did not end with parades or triumph, but with silence, a deep, hollow stillness that stretched across the mountains, the rivers, and the narrow city alleys once lit by lanterns. The sky over Hiroshima and Nagasaki had changed everything, and Japan, in that moment, fell not into despair, but into pause, a nation caught between sorrow and survival. Cities lay in pieces, old temples leaned against broken earth, and families gathered in quiet rooms, counting absences as they folded their grief into daily tasks. And yet, even as smoke cleared and rubble remained, a breath began to return, soft, deliberate, almost imperceptible. Children chased each other barefoot through empty lots. Old men repaired bicycles under trees that had somehow survived. Mothers began cooking again, even with little, letting the smell of boiling barley rise into rooms still missing their windows. Across the country, seeds were planted not just in soil, but in spirit. The American occupation brought change, democracy, a new constitution, restructured schools, and with it came new voices, new ideas, the start of new pages. But through it all, Japan remained itself. In the cracks of broken walls, people still placed flowers. In shrines left standing, incense still curled into the morning air. The rebuilding was not only physical, it was emotional, cultural, spiritual. And it was not rushed. Brick by brick, word by word, song by quiet song, Japan began to rise again, not as it had been, and not yet as it would be, but as something deeply human, scarred, resilient, and still capable of beauty. The years after the war were not loud. They were filled with the low hum of effort, of hands returning to tools, of eyes watching carefully as the pieces of life were picked up, examined, and placed down again. From the late 1940s into the 1950s, Japan was not a nation chasing greatness, but one seeking stability, a roof before ambition, a meal before pride. Cities that had once been flattened began to rise again, not as monuments, but as neighborhoods, simple shops selling pencils, ramen, and hand-sewn clothes, homes with tatami floors and radios tuned to news and music both foreign and familiar. Women went back to work, children back to school, and trains began to run again. Slowly at first, then with greater confidence, carving soft lines through the country like brushstrokes across rice paper. Every advance came with care. The factories, often rebuilt from scrap and silence, began producing not for war, but for life. In the 1960s and 70s, Japan did not roar forward. It moved with intention, grace, and the silent discipline of a craftsman sharpening a blade. What the world would later call a miracle was, in truth, the result of quiet repetition, humble mastery, and an old cultural memory that valued patience over spectacle. Factories glowed with fluorescent light as workers in crisp uniforms checked every seam, every gear, every circuit board, not rushing, but refining, believing that excellence was not something found, but something slowly made. The streets of Tokyo filled with tiny cars, boxy and efficient, symbols of a country that now produced not only for itself, but for the world. Radios, televisions, and cameras bearing the names of Japanese companies crossed oceans, quietly changing lives in distant homes. And yet, in the offices where these devices were designed, slippers were still worn indoors. Tea was still served with two hands, and meetings began with a respectful bow. Skyscrapers rose in Shinjuku, blinking with ambition, while bullet trains, the Shinkansen, sliced through the landscape with a soft roar, arriving precisely on time, like haiku written in steel. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics signaled a new beginning, but even then, cherry blossoms still fell across the lanes and temples still stood in the shadow of neon. Despite all the speed, the soul of the nation did not blur. Vending machines stood beside shrines, businessmen paused before stone Jizo statues, and, in quiet corners of rural inns, onsen steam rose like memory from ancient rock. Growth, for Japan, was never just economic. It was spiritual, cultural, human. And though the numbers rose and the factories buzzed, the heartbeat of the country remained steady, respectful, and still quietly aware of every moment it touched. In the 1980s, Japan stood at a curious height. Its cities glittered with wealth, its currency strengthened with quiet pride, and its vision of the future gleamed like mirrored glass under neon skies. Land in Tokyo became more precious than gold, golf memberships were traded like fortunes, and businessmen in dark suits moved through marble lobbies with the confident rhythm of a country that had climbed far, fast. There were advertisements filled with perfect smiles, electronics that shrank each season, and architecture that stretched upward like ambition itself. And yet, beneath this shimmer, the old ways still lived. Women in kimono passed by glass towers, festivals still lit the summer nights with paper lanterns, and temple bells still rang in the new year, slow and resonant. It was a time when Japan dreamed boldly. When the 1990s began, it was not with a crash, but with a hush, a gradual softening of pace, like the tide pulling gently back after years of waves rising higher and higher. The bubble had burst, and with it went the certainty of constant growth. Japan entered what the world would call its lost decades, but inside the country it did not feel lost. It felt quiet, introspective, slower. Companies tightened, jobs became uncertain, and the rush of the 80s gave way to careful budgeting, to smaller dreams, but also to deeper thinking. People returned to older pleasures, handwritten letters, neighborhood shops, family dinners with simple food. The trains still ran precisely, but with fewer passengers full of urgency. In gardens, caretakers raked fallen leaves with the same care as before, and school children still sang in chorus, their voices rising in gymnasiums where the walls echoed not ambition, but community. Technology continued to advance. The internet came, cell phones shrank, but even in this digital tide, Japan remained analog at heart. Books still read on paper, prayers still whispered at shrines, chopsticks still placed gently across lacquer bowls. The countryside grew older, quieter, but it did not vanish. It endured. Grandmothers pickled vegetables with their grandchildren, shopkeepers swept doorsteps before opening each day, and the mountains, as always, stood watching, unchanged. It was a time of reflection more than movement, of endurance more than reinvention, and through it all, Japan kept its rhythm, not marching, not racing, but walking slowly, respectfully, as if to say, growth is not only measured by speed or height, but by how gently we carry our past while moving forward. As the year 2000 arrived, Japan did not greet it with fireworks or fanfare, but with a quiet awareness that it had grown older, wiser, and more reflective. The neon still shimmered in the cities, bullet trains still whispered through tunnels, and vending machines still blinked softly on empty corners at night. But the country had subtly shifted. The ambition of earlier decades had softened into precision, sustainability, and grace. In Tokyo, young people strolled through ancient parks with smartphones in one hand and matcha ice cream in the other, blending centuries in a single gesture. Anime and video games carried Japanese stories far beyond its shores, yet at home, tea was still poured with both hands and reverence. The world looked to Japan as a symbol of both tradition and modernity, a country that had mastered robotics and reverence, satellites and seasonal rituals. The 2010s arrived as a decade of quiet harmony, where Japan's old spirit met new technology with subtle grace. Cities thrummed softly with life, subways ran on time, robots assisted in hospitals, and festivals continued to light the nights with paper lanterns and fireworks. The world marveled at Japanese advances in electronics, medicine, and sustainability, but at home, many found comfort in time-honored rituals. Morning bows, seasonal flower viewing, and the steady pace of a tea ceremony. The aging population shaped policies, communities, and family life, deepening respect for those who carried memories like treasured scrolls. Disaster preparedness became a national focus, rooted in both science and centuries of wisdom passed down through stories and traditions. Meanwhile, young people balanced global influences with pride in their heritage, blending street fashion with kimono patterns, digital music with the haunting tones of the shakuhachi flute. And beyond the cities, quiet villages, preserved gardens, and wooden shrines where monks chanted softly beneath swaying trees. In this decade, Japan showed the world that progress need not erase the past, but could walk alongside it, careful, deliberate, and always mindful of the footsteps behind. As the 2010s deepened, Japan faced questions both familiar and new, as an aging population and shifting global currents tested the quiet steadiness it had long cherished. Cities grew denser, but also quieter in certain corners, where younger generations moved abroad or sought different lives, leaving behind villages wrapped in mist and memory. The government encouraged innovation while preserving cultural treasures, recognizing that the soul of the nation lay in both its technology and its temples. Environmental concerns grew louder, yet many still found solace in the same gardens where cherry blossoms had fallen for centuries. People gathered at local festivals, their laughter mingling with the rustle of paper lanterns and the distant toll of temple bells. In schools, history was taught not only as fact, but as story, a way to understand where the nation had been and where it might gently go. The earthquake and tsunami of 2011 left scars deep in both land and spirit, yet from those wounds blossomed remarkable resilience, community, and the quiet rebuilding of lives with hands both skilled and caring. Through it all, Japan walked a path of balance, embracing the future with curiosity, while holding fast to the traditions that rooted it in time and place, like a great tree, weathering every season with grace. As the world entered the 2020s, Japan faced the unfolding of new challenges and opportunities with the same composed spirit that had carried it through centuries of change. The global pandemic brought stillness to bustling streets, the hum of bullet trains slowed, and homes became sanctuaries filled with books, calligraphy brushes, and steaming cups of tea. Though the pause was unexpected, it offered moments of reflection, a chance to reconnect with nature in quiet parks, to listen once again to the distant ring of temple bells at dawn, and to honor traditions in ways both ancient and newly adapted. Technology advanced steadily, blending seamlessly with everyday life. Robots assisted the elderly, remote work reshaped the rhythm of cities, and virtual festivals brought people together across distances. At the same time, challenges such as demographic shifts and climate concerns called for innovation, grounded in mindfulness, respect, and care. Across the nation, from neon-lit streets to rural rice paddies, people continued to cherish community, art, and the subtle beauty of impermanence. The falling sakura petals, the changing seasons, the quiet moments between breath and thought. Japan's journey in this decade is still unfolding, a continuing story of balance, honoring the past, embracing the present, and stepping gently toward the future, one mindful step at a time. As the world stepped into the 2020s, Japan found itself at a unique crossroads, a moment where centuries of tradition met an ever-accelerating modern world, and where the unexpected pause of a global pandemic invited quiet reflection as much as challenge. The streets of Tokyo, usually alive with the rhythm of footsteps, conversations, and trains, softened to a gentler cadence. Shops that once bustled with customers now waited patiently for the return of familiar faces, while home life blossomed anew in tatami rooms and kitchen tables. People turned inward, reconnecting with the simple acts of daily life, preparing tea with deliberate care, tending small indoor gardens, and listening to the soft crackle of a radio playing old songs. Technology, too, wove deeper into the fabric of everyday existence. Telework replaced crowded commutes, robots offered support to the elderly in quiet nursing homes, and virtual festivals became bridges of joy, linking neighbors separated by distance. Yet despite these shifts, the rhythm of the seasons remained a guiding pulse. Cherry blossoms still burst into gentle clouds of pink, beckoning people outdoors as restrictions eased. Autumn's maple leaves painted hillsides in fiery reds and golds, and snow blanketed mountain villages in a serene hush, inviting introspection. The nation's resilience was quietly visible in every bowed greeting, every shared meal, every hand extended in kindness. Challenges such as an aging population and climate change pressed on the collective heart. The unfolding 2020s brought with them a gentle transformation that touched every corner of Japan's islands. The global pandemic cast a long shadow, prompting society to slow and reflect in ways unseen for generations. Streets once crowded with salarymen in dark suits and students laughing together became more still, inviting an unusual calm in cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto. This quietness, though born from hardship, allowed many to rediscover the small, enduring joys of daily life. The delicate scent of incense rising from neighborhood shrines, the steady tick of time during a shared meal, the peaceful rhythm of morning prayers, and the soft murmur of temple bells. Remote work reshaped routines, family meals grew longer, conversations deeper, and the importance of community reawakened. Technology became a lifeline, connecting elderly parents with distant children through video calls, enabling doctors to care from afar, and bringing festivals and cultural events into virtual spaces where kimono-clad dancers performed and taiko drums echoed into living rooms. Yet, despite the digital embrace, the Japanese spirit remained rooted in tactile traditions. Hands folding origami cranes, feet stepping carefully over tatami mats, voices chanting sutras in quiet temples. Nature, too, continued its timeless dance. Cherry trees bloomed in spring, filling parks with soft petals, while the quiet hum of cicadas marked summer's heat. As the nation navigated the uncertainties of climate change, efforts grew to harmonize progress with preservation. Solar panels appeared beside rice paddies, urban gardens flourished on rooftops, and local crafts found new audiences worldwide through online markets. The challenges of an aging society led to innovations in care and companionship, blending robotics with heartfelt human connection, ensuring elders remained honored and embraced. Education evolved gently, balancing new technology with teachings that honored the past, lessons in history, ethics, and respect, preparing young minds to carry Japan's legacy forward with humility and insight. In every step through this decade, Japan continues to weave a tapestry of resilience, patience, and grace. A story of quiet renewal unfolding beneath the ever-changing sky. Culinary traditions, too, found fresh expressions. Local farmers and chefs collaborated to revive forgotten crops and recipes, emphasizing seasonal, sustainable ingredients that connected people back to the land and its rhythms. Meanwhile, quiet neighborhoods preserved the beauty of simple living. Wooden houses with sliding shoji screens, gardens tended with care, and neighbors greeting each other with warm bows. This ongoing dance between preservation and progress illustrates the Japanese way, not a choice between past and future, but a continuous dialogue. Even as technology reshapes daily life, the pulse of culture beats steadily. In the great conversation of nations, Japan, in the 2020s, speaks not with volume, but with presence, a steady, thoughtful voice amid the noise of rapid change. Its influence is not only seen in exports or technology, but felt in something deeper, a way of thinking, of moving, of being. Around the world, people study Japanese craftsmanship, not just for the beauty of its results, but for the calm, deliberate process behind it. The idea that doing something well takes time, attention, and humility. Japanese films, games, and literature continue to inspire global audiences, not just because they entertain, but because they carry quiet truths about nature, impermanence, friendship, duty, love. And while Japan remains deeply connected to tradition, it engages with the global future carefully and thoughtfully, participating in international climate talks, building disaster-resilient technology, and hosting students and workers from many cultures with a growing sense of openness. The country's aging population, once seen as a burden, is now viewed by some as a chance to model compassion and dignity for a world that will one day follow. Even in diplomacy, Japan prefers dialogue over domination, consensus over conflict, a reflection of centuries spent valuing balance and respect. Within its borders, people continue to look outward, curious and considerate, even as they preserve the inward rhythm of their own lives. Walking along a quiet Kyoto alley or sitting in a Sapporo cafe, one might feel it, the awareness that Japan is not rushing to lead the world, but gently offering something rarer, an example of how to move forward without losing oneself. In a century filled with speed and noise, Japan remains a country where silence, care, and memory shape the way forward, softly, surely, with the strength of mountains and the patience of the sea. Knowledge reshapes daily life. The pulse of culture beats steadily. Beyond policies, cities, and innovations, there's something in Japan that moves more quietly, something not always named, but always felt. It is a spirit woven into everyday life, a way of perceiving the world that finds beauty in what is small, temporary, and imperfect. This is where the ancient ideas of wabi-sabi, mono no aware, and ma live, not only in poetry or painting, but in how people arrange flowers, pause before speaking, or notice the last leaf clinging to a tree before winter. In Japanese homes, light filters gently through shoji paper screens. Shadows are not banished but welcomed, and silence is not empty but full of meaning. Even the way a bento box is prepared. In Japan, the passage of time is not marked by dramatic ruptures, but by the steady handover of wisdom from one generation to the next. In the 2020s, this dialogue continues softly, a grandmother showing her grandchild how to fold origami with care, an old man tending bonsai trees while a young neighbor watches in silence, learning without words. Across the country, the voices of elders are not silenced by age, but listened to with patience. In small towns and big cities alike, families gather under one roof, multi-generational homes where children learn not only math and science, but how to serve tea, how to speak gently, how to listen deeply. Elders, in turn, look upon the young not with resistance to change, but with a quiet pride. They see new ideas blooming, technology reshaping work, gender roles evolving, creativity flowing across digital platforms. And yet, even amid this change, the young do not forget. Many choose to preserve what they inherit, restoring wooden homes rather than replacing them, practicing traditional music even as they produce electronic beats, speaking English and coding apps while still bowing before shrines on New Year's Day. This harmony between past and present is not always perfect, but it is deeply intentional. In schools, students recite poems written centuries ago while building robots in the next hour's class. In neighborhoods, festivals blend old dances with modern music. Even in moments of protest or reform, the tone often remains peaceful, reasoned, a desire not to erase what came before, but to gently reshape it. This intergenerational rhythm, like the passing of seasons or the blooming of the same cherry trees each spring, offers Japan a kind of timeless stability. The future is not feared but approached with respect, not as a place to conquer but as a path to walk, side by side, hand in hand, carrying the soft lanterns of memory and hope. As Japan steps deeper into the heart of the 21st century, it does so with a kind of clarity that few fast-moving societies can claim. A future shaped not by the urgency to expand, but by the intention to endure. Cities may continue to rise and technologies may evolve, but there remains an invisible architecture beneath it all, a structure made of ritual, rhythm, and restraint. The questions Japan faces about energy, aging, identity, and change are shared by many nations, yet the answers here are often sought not only in progress, but in preservation. Architecture grows greener, not taller. Forests are protected not as scenery, but as ancestors. In Tohoku, where memories of the 2011 earthquake still linger, entire communities rebuild with awareness of the Earth's rhythms, honoring what was lost without rushing to erase the traces. The sea remains a presence, sometimes calm, sometimes fierce, but always watched with respect. And in this time there is a quiet revolution underway, not loud or flashy, but deep. In the end, to walk through the story of Japan is not to follow a straight road, but to wander a quiet path that curves like a river, sometimes hidden beneath mist, sometimes open under moonlight. It is a journey not defined by conquest or dominance, but by resilience, rhythm, and reverence. Here is a land where the old and the new do not argue, but bow to one another, where silence is not emptiness, but a vessel filled with thought. Japan does not ask the world to imitate it, only to observe, perhaps, the value of moving slowly, listening deeply, and finding beauty in what fades. From the Jomon potter, pressing patterns into clay 12,000 years ago, to the child today, writing their first haiku by hand, there has always been a through line, a tenderness for the world, and a wish to live well within it. Mount Fuji still watches in the distance, clouds drifting across its face. Trains still glide quietly through rice fields. Shrines still wait under cedar trees, doors open to anyone who wishes to step inside, with clean hands and a bowed head. The story is not over. It never is. But as we come to rest in this final moment of our journey, we can sense it, the hush of falling snow, the warmth of tatami beneath our feet, the faint rustle of bamboo in the wind. Japan continues, not with haste, but with care, a nation not frozen in time, but held gently by it. And if you listen closely, even now, you may still hear it, the soft rhythm of a country breathing through centuries, one quiet day at a time. Now that the path has been walked and the lanterns have dimmed, there is only quiet. Not the silence of an ending, but the soft presence of something that lingers. The story of Japan does not stop with the final word, nor with the ticking of clocks or the turning of a page. It flows onward in the hush between footsteps on a temple path, in the gentle bow between strangers on a train, in the wind brushing through bamboo that bends but never breaks. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson carried through every era, that strength need not shout, and time does not hurry here.